Star Trek, The Nerdy Frontier. These are the discussions of the Good Times Society. Their continuing mission to explore each episode, to seek out new topics and ridiculous observations, to boldly watch what they've already watched before. So, Becca, I have a moral question for you.
I'm so good at these.
If Xander and I were forced to fight 18th century garbed lasagna-faced urukai, and you could save our lives, because it was very high potential that we were probably going to die in this altercation. After all, they have phaser rifles. And you could interfere in this situation, but it would mean that the meme Becca cheats returns.
Oh no, wait.
Would you do it?
Okay, so I was coming along on that whole journey and totally down as I was screaming at Riker, give up your stupid word, it doesn't matter, save this child. And then you brought in the Becca Cheats thing, and I hate that. It's like when somebody calls Marty from Back to the Future chicken. It makes me do irrational things.
You know, I would sacrifice
so
myself for that. So, yeah, that's fair.
What will you do for near godhood, right? That's the question of this episode, which is hide and Q.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting one. Did you guys like it? What'd you think?
It had its moments.
This was much scarier as the horror film Hide and Seek about the girl who marries into a board game fortune.
What?
It's just this new movie that's out where it's basically like Get Out, except the main character is a white girl and the enemy is rich people. She's wearing a wedding dress and running from people trying to kill her. Anyway, this has the elements of being a real horror. It reminded me of that premise of like, we're going to play. Anyway, they didn't really hide.
Yeah, I mean, this establishes the format of a Q episode. So we saw in Farpoint, like, sort of what the Q can do and sort of what their sort of deal is. And now this is just continuing that, this could happen at any point except for the wager that was made at the end. Will they hold up their end of the bargain? Will they not? Who knows?
Yeah, it's so interesting to learn more about what is called the Q Continuum.
Yeah.
He calls it a limitless dimension of the galaxy. And then I didn't realize until it happened that this was a recruitment mission. Mm-hmm. This is trying to make Riker, part of their Borg, as it were.
Do you think that Q was telling the truth about that, though? That, like, they were actually looking to recruit him so much as, like, was Q kind of playing with him to give him the power just to experiment to see what he would do?
Oh, could it have been a test where he'd take backsies?
Or just another one of his many games,
Yeah.
My interpretation was that Q is incredibly lonely, and he wants to be able to give a gift to have his own personal fulfillment of, see, it is good to be part of Q because Riker did it, and I respect Riker. I'm obsessed with Riker for some reason.
Yeah, well, even taking a step back in the meta a little bit and looking at Q as a plot device character, this is a great time to sort of establish what principles these characters will stand behind and what lines they'll cross when their sort of moral compasses come into play. And it's really interesting on that, like, if these characters got everything that they wanted, like godhood or various gifts like Wizard of Oz style, we realize that it's the journey, not the destination, and I think that's a really good way to put that.
Yeah, even Q says it, he nails it on the head with the Hamlet quote, which is the play's the thing, right?
Right.
I liked a lot of the writing of this episode. It felt like what was a really cool concept, they kind of jammed in the last 20 minutes, which is essentially giving Riker the godhood and seeing what choices he would make with it. I feel like we only got really to see that in the last, 10, 15, 20 minutes or so. Everything else was this weird game that didn't really have much of a conclusion.
Yeah.
Just a lot of fun costume work.
They're really hinting at that A plot, B plot type of thing that Star Trek eventually gets to, but they're still struggling at this moment.
Yeah, I really wasn't into the first part of the episode until it really hooked me in the fifth act when Riker has to make these really, really difficult decisions and you see everybody have to deal with the opportunity of being given their ultimate dream. But should we start at the beginning and talk more about that?
So the Enterprise is on their way to help some mining colony that has undergone like an explosion or an accident of some sort, and the curtain of Tetris shapes comes over the Enterprise once again. And Q shows up, and I'm pretty sure, does he even make a declaration in that first teaser? Does he just appear in the Admiral's uniform?
Well, he shows up as like his entity form, and then was like, you're
the Cobra globe thing, right?
Like your feeble mind
my God.
cannot handle this Windows screensaver. I'll go into my Admiral uniform. Yeah.
So I actually have what that thing is. I looked it up on the encyclopedia. It's called an Aldebaran serpent, which I think he calls himself that in the episode. In the final draft, which was written in '87, Q first appears, quote, as a rapidly rotating, blindingly brilliant diamond blue light, and only later assumes the Aldebaran serpent, which describes as a, quote, writhing snake with snapping fangs, an instant away from fanging the bridge crew.
Wow. Who knew?
I feel like so many things are so much scarier on the page than when they're enacted. Like when he first teleports half of our bridge crew, and they were like, you know what's a good alien background for this sky? Just a green screen. Let's not put anything on it, because people don't know in 1987 that a green screen is exactly this chroma key color. Yeah. But now we do.
Right. The things they could get away with.
Right?
You know, Riker was doing something posture-wise that I'd never seen him do, and he did it before he even became Q. Mm-hmm. He was crossing his arms very, like, haughtily, and I don't think we'll ever see him really do it like that again. His Jonathan Frakes' stance is very,
wide.
He stands up at attention. He lets his presence kind of do the talking for him, and the crossed arms felt very closed to me, or self-conscious, and it was a weird look for him in this episode.
I remember him doing it more after he achieved his godlike state, to sort of say, I am above you now, and I understand things you don't. And I wrote, it looks like a little kid that caught a bug.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's so proud of himself. He looks somehow smaller in that way.
The thing is, it kind of looks like an acting exercise of like someone saying, okay, there's this character. What would this character look like if they suddenly achieved godhood? How would they stand? How would they do this? And they're like, like this,
Yeah,
but
much of this episode feels like that, very staged, theatrical.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, and I think that they kind of get away with it because they have all the Shakespeare quotes. They kind of set this up to be a play, and it's a game, and that theatricality kind of bleeds through, which I thought was really cool. One of the things that I didn't like right in the beginning when we're thrown into this game with the Q and things like that is Tasha Yar is yet again put in a damsel in distress position, and it drives me nuts.
And reacts with some real over-the-top melodramatic performance, in my opinion. I did not like her penalty box performance.
No.
I can't do it. I just always get put here. Yeah. You're sexy, Captain.
Well, they didn't even really give her anything to do.
No.
She just was kind of teleported off the first one, and then that was it.
And there was a very telling thing in the opening scene on the bridge when Q first comes on board as the snake thing, and Worf leaps over the banister right in front of Tasha Yar. It's like, somebody's challenging your place in security.
Right, because Tasha is the head of security. She should have been the one leaping over the banister
I actually was thinking that he was trying to protect the captain, but the blocking of the actual bridge didn't allow them to show that. I thought it was a weird choice anyway, because he didn't need to get closer. He has a ranged weapon, so really flanking the snake thing would be a great thing. He should go over by the turbo lift.
There are just a lot of issues.
And then Q, of course, repeats over and over that at Far Point he took an interest in Riker.
They're trying to fabricate.
I don't remember that.
Yeah, that's totally fake.
Well, people can't just go back and on demand watch these episodes, so no one will know if we say Q was super into Riker the whole time.
Right. They must be misremembering it. They'll catch it on some rerun or something, but then it won't matter.
Oh, I must have forgot that. Weird. Okay. Yeah, he must have been interested in Riker then.
I will say, though, that I like that he picked someone else to pick on than Picard, even though he still picks on Picard in this episode. I really did love the banter about where he mocked him for seizing my vessel. You seized my vessel. Is that all you could say?
Right.
But it makes sense to set up Picard to be the one who's wise and right, and you need this sort of playboy that's interested in the shiny things to come along and be tempted by godhood.
Yeah.
So when the game's afoot, they come down to this Class M planet, and then that's when Tasha is sent to. Yeah.
Now you know what Class M is, and you're using the lingo.
I sure do. Using the lingo because Data said it.
Yeah.
So you'll tell me something, and then I'll hear it in the show later.
See, that's what makes
Xander told me all about that.
I think that's what makes the technobabble fun, is because the writers also catch on to that, people are paying attention, so they can do little plot things that if you're following the technobabble, you can kind of think about it and solve the puzzle ahead of time as well.
Well, this is probably the phase of Star Trek where people were really paying attention, right? Yeah. So that's when the writers and the crew probably got all of the letters from from all the fans who wanted to tell them everything they were doing both right and wrong.
Oh, from the original fans?
Yeah. Or new ones too.
Yep.
So I watched the 30-year reunion of the cast. There's a video on YouTube, and there was a really fun bit where Brett Spiner, Data, and Michael Dorn, Worf. See, I'm remembering actors.
Yeah,
you're doing it.
They in this one time they loved fucking with Patrick Stewart when he was directing.
Yep.
And it's so fun because they were talking about a bar scene where they would come in and they were looking for some guy, and the guy was right there. They didn't need to ask the bartender where this guy was, but they had to do this because it was in the script. And so they thought it was so silly that they just decided to really mess with the director by coming in every time and doing a different type of accent. Okay, now let's do it German. Now let's do it super Polish or whatever. And so I thought of that because someone in the audience was like, do you have that often where you must play something that intellectually you know isn't true? And they were like, yeah, that's acting. The only difference is we decided to fuck with Patrick Stewart this time. And then I thought of it because there's the whole Napoleonic tent. Yeah. And then when they're transported, they're wandering around. They don't know where they are. And then Tasha goes, there, sir. And it's there's a whole tent with Q sitting in it in this ridiculous outfit. And of course they would have seen it.
Right.
I feel like they needed a reveal and they didn't have it in the time or the budget to do anything. So they just did a pan over situation.
Also, I haven't put this together before, but those are they look like Tellarites, which is definitely a species that we hadn't seen in Next Generation, but in original series we did. They were sort of these pig-masked aliens, and you'll see later on Tellarites come back into play, but they were definitely those Tellarite masks with Napoleonic garb, and I was like, oh.
Named after the Colorado Film Festival?
Oh, I don't know about that.
Oh, Telluride. Jake called them lasagna faces.
Yeah.
I like that.
Well, I don't know if they are an established canon alien of any sort, if they were just kind of generic
No,
ones.
I think
it's unclear to me.
They were supposed to be vicious animal things, but they definitely reused masks from original series, or something very similar to what the Tellarites were.
Yeah, well, the whole thing felt like an original series in terms of it was one of those sets that are out that's supposed to be outdoors, but clearly feels like a big stage.
Yep.
The lighting of everything felt that way as well, and of course the concept of a person getting god powers. It happens a few times in the original series, as I recall, right?
Yeah, it's all that question of morality. It's a favorite sort of moral question.
So there's an interesting thing that happens to Picard when the rest of his crew is beamed down, and we find out later that Q just stopped time on the ship. But Picard is sort of in this loneliness box where he can't communicate with anyone else on the ship. Everybody he knows is just beamed out, and he stays pretty cool and collected, which tells me something about his character, that I would be freaking out and screaming and running in circles even if I was left alone like that for 5 minutes. But
now you said it was interesting. What was interesting about it?
Okay, so not the scene, not the execution production-wise, just the idea of what do we learn about this character when they're in this situation where they're utterly helpless. And he was like, I can't even make a captain's log. Maybe I'll get some tea.
But that's my point, is that scene served almost no purpose. There wasn't really anything for him to do until Tasha showed up and they talked, and then Didn't Q just immediately let her out of the penalty box? He's like, I'm bored.
Yeah.
Just as we were all bored with that scene, we were just waiting for this plot to move on.
I thought she was going to actually die this episode because I know because, you guys were hinting at some stuff. And then I saw spoilers where she's not going to be around forever. I know, it's upsetting.
What would give you that idea?
And I thought this was it because I know that it's going to be unceremonious too because she was like, write me off the show, which is crazy. And I'm sure she has come to terms with and tells herself she doesn't regret it, but she regrets it.
Real quick before we move on, I disagree with you, Jake, a little bit because I'm so glad you brought this up, Becca. I think that this really highlights one of the character points of Picard in that it highlights his patience. Starting from now and a little bit before, but from now on, one of the things that Picard has that no other captain had really had before is this like infinite patience. It gets tested time and time again, whether he's being tortured or whether he's being trapped to live out his full life, like in some alternate dimension. He comes back and resumes as if nothing has happened because he has this infinite patience, and that's Picard's superpower.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, Jake, I think why it stood out to me is because I have 0 of that.
Yeah.
Therefore, I was amazed at just this short scene that meant nothing to a lot of people.
That sounds right to me.
Yeah.
I think that's a theory we should carry on through the series and see how that holds up. That's great. That's good to know.
Yeah.
I like that for him. You're right, because, Kirk was an impulsive guy, right? I mean, doesn't mean he wasn't tactical, but he was definitely, like, the action man.
Yeah, and
I love that.
And not only that, Picard has learned since their last encounter with Q to expect things to be out of whack and totally out of the ordinary. And so when he's left alone on the bridge, he just goes along with it like, well, I just got to wait this through and find out what the challenge is and rise to it because he's confident that he will.
Yeah, I guess the trap as a writer is to say, he's going to freak out, obviously. But we as the audience know Q is going to do this type of stuff. So for the character to not know, then we get ahead of the character, and that's never good writing.
Right. That's exactly right.
And so Q gives Riker this power, and he lets him cheat at the game, which, of course, Q says that fairness is such a human concept, which I really loved. I loved that idea. He's like, this will be completely unfair.
Yeah.
That's just the way
just owning up to it.
Yeah. And I really actually appreciated that. I was like, oh, yeah, it is a human concept. We're always looking for the balance of things.
Right.
And balance is in our perception and how we want to view it. And so if Riker's given the power to just not worry about balance, how is he going to handle it? I like that, the dilemma. I'm sad it comes 35 minutes into the episode.
Yeah.
I like it. Boy, I remember as a kid moments from this episode, especially Wesley getting stabbed with a bayonet.
It was
that
brutal.
Was intense, as I remember.
Yeah.
Right in the back.
As you're mentioning, these things happen in such quick succession because 2 of his crewmates die. He immediately brings them back to life. And then he makes a promise that he won't use this power anymore. And that's huge. I mean,
yeah.
I disagree with the use of it, quite honestly.
Huge choices made in about 90 seconds.
Right. Yeah. Well, and then I wrote down in my notes as I was watching this, why is Wesley there? And I thought about it afterwards. Like, I could see them retroactively trying to jam him in because of the wish granting at the end to play with that mechanic. But it just seemed so out of nowhere and so brutal to do something like that. But it goes to show, I guess, Riker's commitment to saving one kid, quote unquote, over another kid that's unfamiliar, which we'll get to in a bit.
Well, I mean, we can talk about. So Riker has these powers, right? And he comes back to the Enterprise, and everything is, I guess, kind of fine for a moment.
Well, they kind of had just put on hold saving 500 people, and when they get there, there's only 7. So way to go, Riker, because your decision to play Q's game killed 400 people, it seems.
Right. Well, it's not like he had a choice.
Picard was level-headedly saying, no, we have more pressing things, Q, sorry. And Riker goes along. So he's kind of subverting the captain's order there at the beginning.
Well, Becca, as you know, a lot of games take longer than what's on the box, so that's not entirely his fault. And Becca,
I'm unaware.
Q did invite him to that game, so like Q as the host probably should have set him up for an appropriate amount of time.
Yeah, well, you always take the time on the box, and you times it by 3.
Well, he also didn't take his turn very often. He kept stalling and talking about things, and they were bullshitting with quotes and stuff, and arguing over rules. I mean, there was so much rules arguing. And
well,
they
maybe
didn't
he
even
just
get to play
needed time to think about what the best optimal move was.
I mean, there were 2 turns in before Riker flipped the table, and the game was over.
Are we still talking about Star Trek?
We somehow are, actually. So Riker can't say, or Riker chooses not to save the little girl in the mining colony, and we come to this head of like, okay, what are we going to do about Riker's situation? Data flat calls him out and says, "Sir, if you have the power of the Q,
right,
you could do something."
Before we move into that, they beam down, and then Geordi's like sort of helping shovel these rocks out, and Data comes over and grabs the boulders and starts throwing them. Right, I wrote down. Remember, Data is very strong. Remember when he was foiled by a Chinese finger trap? Just wanted to bring that back up. Okay, continue.
I would love it if Data was pulling up those boulders and then suddenly his fingers came up with the finger trap on him. He's like, "Sir, no. I need assistance."
Yeah.
Well, to talk a little bit more about the promise, his word that he gave, basically it was Picard who said, "Are you strong enough to refuse this power?" was his wording. So as we open the episode with, it is sort of a game of chicken. He wants to be called strong emotionally and philosophically.
And I think that, after watching Star Trek, you start to sort of hope that there's an alternative plan with the captain and the first officer going on, that they're like putting on airs to trick the enemy and there's going to be a big reveal at the end. And this was sort of Picard's way of planting the seeds of victory within Riker, because they're like, here's the tool that you need to succeed in this, in that don't use these powers. That's what the test is. And it was a way of letting Riker know without flat out saying something of like, "I forbid you to use this," because that doesn't teach anything.
That's true. I like how confident Picard is with it too. He's like, "Riker's got this.
Yeah.
I have no worries whatsoever."
I wrote, "This is when you break your goddamn word, Riker," because it really pulled at my heartstrings to see this little girl that they cast. She was so adorable, and Crusher just says she's dead, and this is heavier than they've gone in a lot of episodes. Like, there's the moments when they lost power on the ship in an earlier episode, and they're like, "Oh, all of our crew is going to freeze to death unless we run out of food first." And those moments when they really give the situation gravity, it feels out of place for the sitcom of the time, and also makes it more like a show of today.
So you're saying there's no gravity to me and Xander being killed or bayoneted by lasagna-faced Urukai? Because you made the choice so quickly.
It's all simulated gravity anyway.
Yeah. And then he becomes just a power-mongering son of a bitch.
Right.
Yeah, he can call a conference without the captain's permission, and he walks off like total... number one of Beverly Hills kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, and then...
Once again, the captain showing his patience.
Right, there it is.
True, there it is. Good point.
Has it happened yet? Somewhere in there, Picard gives a sort of speech and calls Q a flim-flam man, and I just wrote down Worf saying, "Flim-flam?"
Flim-flam?
I love it. And then I wrote down Q loves his costumes, and then Picard immediately says, "Q, why do you love your costumes?" And the harshest line that you can say is, "Do you not have an identity of your own?"
Yes.
Really got under... I imagine got under Q's skin because it was so on point.
It is. And I think that's what Q is jealous of in humanity, because Q is part of a collective. They don't have individuality. This Q, this representation that we're seeing, is an outlier within the collective itself. And they'll go into that further in the future, too. But well spotted, Becca.
So that was actually something that I kind of had a question about, because when they were on the planet's surface, Q told Riker that what he finds interesting about them is was it the capacity for growth or for their yearning to learn more, right?
Something along those lines, yeah.
Something along those lines. But then isn't Q, by showing an interest and experimentation in the human race, like kind of exhibiting the same pattern?
Well, I do say that is a very interesting observation, Jake. Maybe we should keep that in mind.
You should get a podcast, Jake.
For the future.
Actually, I'll start a podcast.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. And I think that's what makes this representation of the collective, namely John Delancey, keeps coming back.
Yeah. Maybe he is a flim-flam man. We never know.
Definitely a flim-flam.
Xander, I like that you called it the Wizard of Oz scene.
Yeah.
That's where we are now. So Wesley gets to be a man.
Right.
Oh my gosh,
20-something man.
Ever. What a man.
And watching this, I definitely think they used Will Wheaton's voice pitched down in ADR.
They did. I wrote down, wow, this actor has a really similar, oh my God, that's ADR. They did a good job.
Definitely ADR.
Data wants to become human, of course, but turns it down. To thine own self be true. And with the Shakespeare motif back again.
That's
that.
Legitimately, this watch through, that's when I started crying.
Me too.
Because it was not only, I love the choices that they made of, we saw... earlier we saw John Delancey in the Data makeup of him simulating sort of what Data would look like, and they never show Brent Spiner in like human makeup because that's like the line that Data won't cross, and I love that they respect that, and sort of it was just beautiful to me.
I was a little worried when he took Data's position before. It was like, is Data just floating in ether? Is he existing in nothingness right now?
Yeah.
And then Riker teleports him back to the bridge after he brings Worf and Wesley back to life. So that was an interesting... I want to hear Data say where he was in that 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And then earlier, I just wanted to talk about their little Shakespeare off. Like, those two actors were dying for it. You know, they read the script and they were like, yes, this is exactly what I do. And then they went and they reread their tomes and like rehearsed their favorite soliloquies just for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, Patrick Stewart is the kind of actor that has huge chunks of those plays memorized. In fact, he actually is a performer who does the Christmas Carol on his own by heart.
Right.
He actually performs it without a script, the entire thing.
I can only do that for Romeo and Michelle's high school reunion.
A fun little backstory for me. One of my favorite productions that I was ever a part of was a full production of the musical Hair, and one of the solos is the soliloquy "What a Piece of Work is Man," but it's sung, and so I have that still memorized. And as soon as he started saying that, I could say it along with him, and I was like, oh, "What a cool feeling!"
I'm gonna need you to record that, and that's gonna go on our Patreon page.
Oh God, okay.
So Rikers can give everybody what they want, including Geordi's vision, and this is the first time we see Geordi without his visor, with those beautiful brown eyes.
That's when LeVar Burton booked Reading Rainbow. No, just kidding.
Yeah, booked my heart.
Yeah,
That was those were such a heavy like concepts that they dipped in on, like what was essentially the last 5 to 6 minutes of the whole episode.
Yeah.
And I really kind of wanted to see that struggle just a bit more, because Geordi being given vision the way he had it seemed very powerful to him, and he's just like, I don't like who's giving it to me.
Well, not only that, they showed earlier in the episode that even Data was impressed by Geordi's visual acuity with the visor of like, oh, they're on the third ridge. Like, the third? You can see that far? And
Yeah,
that's
freckles, I
okay.
could see him.
I was wondering, I was like, why is he so shocked about the third ridge? And I get it now. It was a distance thing.
Yeah, because his visor could see further than even Data's ocular whatever.
Yeah, very cool. I mean, why Data doesn't get an upgrade to visor status? Not sure. A couple things. Well, Geordi turning down sight because he didn't like the way he got it was so beautiful. It broke my heart.
There was still a little moment of yucky, though.
Yeah, and the moment of yucky was him saying to Yar that you're so beautiful. And Xander, as you have brought up in previous episodes, that Yar is a very queer-coded character, and we want her to be that. And I was also upset earlier in the episode when she has this moment with the captain.
Yep.
Captain makes a joke that it's okay to cry on the bridge, and she goes, "Oh,
if
you
only
weren't
with
a
the captain." Yuck.
Yeah, that's
Yuck,
such a
yuck,
weird
yuck.
choice.
Moments of
Not
yuck.
what we ship, you know? Not shipping it. Nope.
It feels like there's a bunch of writers doing different things, and the ones that are keyed into it you'll see in those episodes, and the others who aren't keyed into it don't even treat her like an individual. They just treat them as other women on the ship, and they're like, okay, we'll use them for this purpose.
Women on the bridge. She must be fuckable.
Right. You can see this influence of these older writers of like, well, any red-blooded man on the bridge would compliment this woman on her looks. It's just what men do. And it's like, no, not if you're not an asshole. Like,
yeah, that writer definitely had a cigar in his mouth.
Well, speaking of like creepy moments, though, we haven't even talked about Klingon foreplay.
Right.
Well, that I'm
Holy
into.
Good God.
No, just kidding. Even though he punches her in the face, so
Yeah.
Worf gets a sexy Klingon woman teleported in.
Right.
Yeah, and like his objection is that he like just doesn't want to be a part of that world anymore.
Does this woman exist? Does she have a soul?
Oh, God.
Or is she,
There's a lot there to unpack.
Or was she a construct?
I don't know.
Yeah, and that's what actual power does a Q have? Does it have the power to create sentient life, or does it just create constructs, or what they think a Klingon woman would be like? Because all of that would have had to come from somewhere. It would have been from Riker's preconceptions. It's interesting that this is the first time that we sort of get to see that, because they've hinted at the Klingon sort of mating practices before, but now we sort of see it in action, and it's a lot. Like it's a lot of violence, especially just towards a woman, which is a little hard to take in at sometimes.
Yeah, I needed to see Worf's eye get gouged out and him to be super turned on by that.
Right.
To balance it out.
Just bite off a chunk of his face. Yeah, it was upsetting. It reminded me of capoeira fight dancing, though, which is the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
And I don't like that Q calls Worf a microbrain, because he's one of 2 black actors in the bridge crew, and I don't know, it feels uncomfortable to me.
I felt macro head was a better insult, and microbrain was like too much.
Yeah.
Like you didn't need to tag it as the first part was better.
Right.
Totally.
Macro head works.
Yeah.
I feel for Riker in this situation, too, because there's this moment of he really wants to use this absolute power to do good. Mm-hmm. And gift-giving is hard, and he's a pretty good gift giver, let me just say.
Yeah, very thoughtful.
It's teaching this lesson that the equity of power and equity of suffering is what makes us human.
That's so good.
Well, I wrote down really good notes, so what can I say?
Yeah, that's the core concept of Starfleet, of what they're doing out here in space, in that you don't need currency to do jobs because people are just doing what they're passionate about. And so they're following their passions out here, and this just happens to be in the stars. So it's sort of the philosophy that this new humanity has taken. And with that, the sort of hope, the idealism in the episode is that you won't need absolute power because everything you have is good enough. We have these sort of accommodations with the visor, or with not being quite human, or not growing up fast enough, but you don't need to, because this version of humanity, or whatever it is enlightened enough to recognize that. And that's sort of the didactic lesson that they were trying to teach with the episode, in teaching Riker that.
Well, and the play's the thing, right?
Yeah.
So it's the journey as much as the destination.
100%.
So Riker makes what I guess we all have to agree is the correct choice.
I guess.
And, I guess Q's going to get in trouble, right? He's got some splaining to do, as Picard says.
Yeah.
Because the Continuum rumbles about him, and he screams and is disappeared, right? So we don't see him for a little while.
It was presumptuous of Picard, because who's to say that there was a consequence in the land of Q Continuum, but it was the right choice. And damn, Picard is a wise man. Always listen to him, I guess, is the answer here.
All right. Well, what did you guys think of this episode? How many Qs would you give this?
I'm going to give it 6 out of 10, because I love the core concept they get to of the dream granting power and what that consequence means of godhood. But as you said, Jake, it takes way too long to get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%.
Slow at certain parts.
I would give it a whole continuum. That could be a whole lot or not any at all. I think it had great moments, and I think we got to see some great character definition, especially like if the characters were granted everything that they wanted in their sort of arc, that it wouldn't be satisfying. And I think that's what the writers were struggling, because everybody in this utopia has everything that they need. Why would they continue to move forward and push themselves? Now we see why. This is them getting their answer of, we need to see this journey that they all want to go on. So I think that in itself is a great concept, but the framework to get there, it's a long road.
Yeah, I'll give this one 4 out of 7 Qs, and I reserved the right to go back in time and change my answer, because I have that power.
Time is a flat circle.
Next week, we have a fun one. It's called Haven. Mm-hmm. And the description is, tensions mount as Counselor Troy's arranged marriage nears, and a plague ship approaches the planet.
Gong!
Dun, dun, dun. Oh, gong.
Wait.
Good call on that gong.
Good gong.
Well, just remember to stay...
Engaged.
Engaged.
Betrothed.
Oh, like Troy.